Welcome, Mrs. Kathmann, to our program. What are the motives behind your call to lift the PKK from the terrorist list?
Hello, Delvin. I'm very glad to be here again, and I'm glad to be talking to your audience. It's more a question of when did I write this letter, because I've had this opinion for a long time about the list of terrorist organizations. There is really no reason for the PKK to be on this list. In the first place, it absolutely does not threaten the United States and the United States citizens in any way. However, there is a clause that an organization can be on this list if it threatens foreign relations. So I think that the only reason it has ever been on this list is because Turkey wanted it to be on the list, let's put it that way. Right now, it seemed like it might be a good time to express my opinion for various reasons. One is that Kurdish friends suggested that it might be a good time. Another is that with the thaw in the U.S. relations with Cuba, they're talking about taking Cuba off the list of states which support terrorism. And I thought, okay, this topic also is in the air. And also, I think finally, the people here are beginning to notice the Kurdish people in a much more positive way. I hope that this is the case in any case, but more frequently I get signs of recognition when I mention the Kurdish people. It seems to me that the more the people know what the Kurds are doing, what they have done, what they've done wherever they've had the authority to do so, that all works in favor of better relations with the Kurdish people in Kurdistan of Iraq, and also those that are in Turkey and Syria and Iran. So it seemed to me that was just might be a time when I would be listened to.
Mm-hmm. What would be the consequences of the removal of the Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK from the terrorist list for Turkey, Rojava, and the whole region, in your opinion?
I can only guess, of course, because I don't know the future. Mm-hmm. But at this point, helping the PKK is illegal because of the PKK being on this list. Mm-hmm. Now, that means that I would be committing a crime if I gave a PKK member a bus ticket. You know, there are just many, there are many ways in which you just can't, there's no way of expressing support for the Kurdish people through the PKK. We've been able to do it in other ways. At this point, the Kurdish people are involved in several areas in very terrible war. They're not necessarily part of the dispute, but they're there. And the result is that they've got to defend their homes. Mm-hmm. So there's a great deal of need for help. And the Kurdish people have been asking for it, and some of us would like to see it get there. And it seems to me that I don't know whether to say decriminalizing or something like that, but it's almost that bad. The PKK would give another way for Kurdish helpers to arrive, to move freely, to not to be stigmatized, to be able to be considered allies. For the people who are working for the Kurdish people. When they're considered terrorists, there's no way of accepting them as allies. So in my letter, I referred to them and others as competent Kurdish allies, which I was hoping would send a message. One thing also that has come clear, and it's come clear in the Western media, is that the Kurdish people are, in general, a competent force, whether for defense or for constructing society. In general, they're competent people. That's my perception anyway. And certainly from knowing many Kurdish people closely, and from experiences of outrage when someone does something incompetent, I know that competence is very important. One thing that a lot of this that I'm talking about is about the perception of the Kurdish people in the West. And I often realize that I'm quite different because I already know a lot. So I try to find out and listen to what other people say. And something that has recently been said to me is they want more information on the Kurdish attitude toward Christians. I was going to mention this if it came up, but I think I'll mention it now, that the more information you can get out, there's plenty of information. I can always personally counter with a great many stories, but I don't, you also will have to give more public relations. It is a good time. People are ready to think that Kurdish people, first place, exist, which is something they didn't used to know, and also are good people that, that we would want to be relating to. And that goes for whether they're PKK or whether they're in the Kurdistan of Iraq or whether they're in, it doesn't matter where they are. These distinctions are not the first thing that's going to, that might appeal to governments, but people in general just want to know about Kurds.
So far, the U.S. didn't sacrifice relations with Turkey for sake of Kurds and other issues like the Armenian genocide. Why is Turkey important to the U.S., Mrs. Kathmann?
This is a historical question, and it's not one on which I'm really a great speaker because I actually don't know all the history. Turkey is part of NATO. It's large, it's important, it's fairly stable. The U.S. has a long history with Turkey. What they don't have a long history with, or not a good history with, is the Kurdish people. I think that in large part they simply do what they always have done. They're following their historical policy, which needs to be updated. The same as the situation with these lists. These lists are very, very outdated. I was looking at the list of the terrorist organizations and the list of the countries that are considered to sponsor state terrorism, and they don't include modern threats that are real. So part of this is just a time lapse. They just are not taking stock of the Kurdish reality of today. And I never really necessarily agreed with them, even in the past, but they definitely are not taking stock of what's going on today. They're doing what they always do. Now, the answer to that in politics, which we're talking about, is pressure. It's simply our job to make more noise and until they absolutely must update and do something more adequate. Because at this point, it's really unclear. Any number of issues are unclear. I do not understand their present relationship with Turkey, and I don't think that it has been explored and clarified. And I think Turkey has been a bit schizophrenic in what it's done too. So in that situation, I don't want to explain it because I think a lot of it is just old. Let's get on with now.
Mrs. Kathmann, in the past 1 year, Kurds, Arabs, Assyrians and Syriacs are all together engaged in the democratic confederalism system of Rojava. And as you know, there is now an ISIS destructive campaign on Rojava. Give us, please, your thoughts on these two subjects.
The threat presented by ISIS is simply horrible. I'm a woman. How can I possibly, you know, when I read of women being attracted to this force, I cannot believe the false consciousness that shows. ISIS simply, their concept, I can't believe their concept of God even. It's appalling as far as I'm concerned, and quite impossible, and not in the tradition of any religion of importance in this earth, and including the one they claim. This is not how their behavior is outrageous. Of course, they're not alone in outrageous behavior, but they don't seem to even have a responsible wing. I simply am sympathetic with those people who don't want their towns and their homes taken over by these people. I'm not only referring to what's happening in Rojava, where the unfortunate people in Kobani and all the towns, their towns are in rubble. I'm also talking about the behavior of their allies in Iraq, who have stolen, who have done this horrible siege against the Yazidi people, stolen Yazidi women in large quantities and gone off to sell them in markets. I mean, the number of terrible things they've done, I just can't even imagine how they could have any attraction for anyone. Now, plainly they do. So obviously there are things that I don't understand. And what they are, obviously, I have yet to learn. Now, as far as what is happening in Rojava, as far as what the people are doing in terms of creating an enlightened government, it's beautiful. It's simply beautiful. I love the Kurdish attitude toward representativity, toward including women, toward including religious minorities, toward including everyone. But, and I'm sure it's not quite as rosy as I say, because nothing is in reality. But it is a beautiful attempt to make something out of a real mess of a situation. The Kurds did not ask for this war. They did not provoke this war. They simply aren't there. And therefore, they have no option to, pacifism is not possible when someone is coming into your house and taking it over, and your family, and taking away your sisters and daughters. They're not doing that in Rojava. That's a different thing. I'm conflating the two things. I think from emotion, the taking away large numbers of people happens in Nineveh, and it's simply a war situation in Rojava. But all the same, there are certain images that I have seen which have shocked me, and for example, images of women of my age learning to shoot, which thank God I don't have to do. They said, well, they're coming into our houses, So what if they're grandmothers? All right. In that situation, I would do the same. You have to live whatever life you get, and a lot of it just happens. So, yes.
Mrs. Lucina KATHMANN, an international vice president of PEN International, which is a worldwide association of writers. Thanks a lot for being with us on Ronahî.
Thank you.